Welcome to the Inside Digital Transformation Podcast. Inside Digital Transformation explores how organizations of every size and shape are using technology today to survive and thrive in the face of relentless change. If you are a business or technology leader charged with making the most of digital transformation in your organization, then this podcast is for you. And now here's your host, Alan Bernard, a technology journalist, editor, and copywriter who has been covering the intersection of business and technology for over 2 decades.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Today, I'm speaking with Forrester analyst Carlos Casanova about AIOps, what it is, who's using it, and how it's being deployed to fix IT problems faster. Carlos, along with Forrester analysts Glenn O'Donnell, Audrey Lynch, and Diane Lynch, is the co-author of the 3 stages of preparation for AIOps. The report lays out the foundational elements IT and business leaders need to understand in order to introduce AIOps into their organizations. Hi, Carlos. Thanks for being here.
Hey, Alan, how are you?
Obviously, today we're talking about AIOps,
Yeah.
and probably the best thing to do right out of the gate is to define what that is. So why don't you take a stab at that, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the principle of it is definitely there. It's something that we've had for a while. Frankly, when you think of its ultimate objectives, right, to enhance decisions, to make decisions better, more insights, and that sort of thing, some of that probably goes all the way back to even my old days in CMDB, right? It's pulling all this data together, getting rid of some of the noise, and really providing, like, what does this mean to my business partner? What does this mean to that business service that's being delivered? We tend to, in technology, obviously, hey, we're going to improve the server, we're going to improve the network, with maybe not really understanding that well what it means to our business partners trying to make sales or close a deal and that sort of thing. So it's about those insights. Where the AI piece comes into it is getting through some of that noise, which we've always struggled from just volumes and data, scale and whatnot, that we've tried to do our best with pivot tables and spreadsheets and everything else. Right. But the AI really takes that and says, hey, I can go through far more, larger volumes of data. I can slice this better. And now I can, as you said, I can provide that human that needs to make a decision a much better informed background and suggestions on what should be done and what has been done, and maybe the odds of something being more successful than another. So it provides all that. And the last part of that, the definition for AIOps that I came up with was the enriched actionable information. That's where the AI really adds that value to say, hey, you know what, we've seen this, and 97% of the time, this is what the organization has done. This is how it impacts our business services. And even in some cases, a little bit more nuanced, where we have things on the business side, cart abandonment and other types of metrics that our business folks, watch. But how about if we were able to provide them in their sales funnel, on their website, better insights to where things slow down, and when customers slow down through the sales funnel way before they get to the cart, to understand maybe it's just a bad web design. Maybe the page is slowing people down. And when you take the session replay capabilities, you see that folks are having a hard time hitting the next button or how to progress to the next stage of that funnel. And that's just the usability. That's the context that we, as a human, if I was looking at that metric, would be really difficult to determine.
But how does AIOps, to me, is aimed at IT operations, not website design and things like that. So if the website, from an IT point of view, is functioning fine, right? All the lights are green, then how does AIOps help with that issue?
So when you think of the operations, what is the point of the AI operations, or of IT operations? It's not for IT. It's really for the business.
Right.
It's ultimately for the business, supporting the business. So when we take that and we say, we still need to run our operations more intelligently, more efficiently, more effectively. But if we take some of those analytics from operations, feed those back to development, feed those back to service design, they can infer, they can learn from just the operational metrics what they may need to do on the next version of the website, maybe how the funnels are working. And there's some tools that target directly those things on the business side, absolutely. But the operational piece is we have the availability and access to certain analytics in our operational systems that if we were to provide that as a retrospective to our partners upstream, they could, in theory, also build it out a little bit more efficiently, more effectively, more resilient, really, for the operations.
So how does AIOps help in that process? Because I can think of probably, I've never done ops, but there's probably 10 ways to get that same information into the hands of developers and designers. So.
Yeah, and that's AIOps really kind of pulls all of that together. So if we know what we're looking for, and the say a business owner comes down and says, hey, we're having some slowdown here. So it's a targeted effort. It's going in there. It's like, let's go look at that specifically.
Okay.
Where AIOps is, because it's looking at the larger ecosystem, and it can automatically filter out some anomalies and say, hey, we're seeing some slowdowns here that we don't know what they are. We haven't seen those before. Let's provide those back to the folks that might understand what that means to us. Versus, I know I'm having a slowdown. I know we're losing customer potential or clients potentially. Let's go, hey, we need to look at this and bring the IT team in, bring the business folks in to go deliberately look at that versus surfacing stuff that we're not even frankly aware might be an issue.
Right, because the way in the research I've done for the call, it's been presented as like a mean time to repair issue, right? It's a fix-it issue. So you deploy AIOps in order to keep, IT operations running, streamline operations, make them run more efficiently, improve mean time to repair and all of the facets of that, right? But what you're saying is you could use this, you could up-level this almost, right, into a business tool.
My perspective, having spent, decades now on trying to connect the IT activities back to why do we care?
Right. Yeah.
That's really ultimately where the problem is.
Sure.
And we can improve our IT stuff as much as we possibly want, but if it doesn't somehow translate into some business gain, then we're really just wasting time and money. One of the examples I use all the time is open enrollment. So in the North America, we know come October, November, everybody's got to go through it. 100 million people going through some kind of open enrollment, and you get a 2-week window. That's what it is. Right. So I worked for an organization for a while that had, I think, 80 out of the Fortune 100 companies. So you're talking tens of millions of people during those 2-week periods. If there's even a blip of that system during that window, all heads will roll, right?
It's just awful. And it's hard enough to use as it is. I mean,
exactly. Yeah, right. If something happens to that system in February for 3 days, besides like a birth, a divorce, a death, it's really I don't want to say it's insignificant, obviously, to those individuals, but from a systems perspective, it's not timely. But what we do from IT perspective, when we don't have the insights of how that impacts business, in February, we are still going to scramble the jets, pull all the resources we have, and we're going to go spend a ton of time and money on fixing something that has zero user impact or minimal impact.
Right. I mean, that as a business person, know that, right? So, but AIOps tells you what, or how does AIOps aid in this process?
Right. So the big part is the way I've got the AIOps umbrella defined. It spans all of your sensory and telemetry data, including all the business and context. So when it's correlating and doing that noise reduction, it's pulling part of that noise reduction is, does the business care?
Well, the noise reduction is what? It's finding the normal. AIOps looks for normal, right? It's not just setting thresholds and setting scores, right? It's so much more than that, right? So go ahead.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's setting the normal in the context, in the seasonality, in the sales cycle, in the retail windows.
So it knows it's Christmas.
Exactly. Black Friday. You don't want to know that that system is blipping on you on Thanksgiving. You better really get it. So the large AIOps platforms, they're taking that into account, not just the server administrator's report and the network report.
The log data, the network flow data, all that.
And that's so huge. Right. That's huge. And when you add to it, hey, this is an incredibly sensitive time for our business, financials, month end, quarter end, year end, that sort of thing. This is a lot more critical. We can't afford any of that.
Okay. So, and you can go into these tools and they will take this into account. And so when we'll just take a basic, when they're alerting, right, which is, a horrible thing that they do, but they do a lot of it.
Yeah.
The tool kind of knows to prioritize certain systems, certain processes, certain workflows at certain times of the year. In this instance that we're using Christmas, well, as opposed to February, where, maybe a down shopping cart doesn't quite rise to the priority that it would in December. Is that
right?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so it makes them a lot smarter than just, because that was one of my questions. It's like, how is this different than existing automation, right?
Yeah.
And existing tool sets that just give alert fatigue all day, right?
Yeah. And when you tie the automation, and that's part of the definition that I put out, was the automation helps with that. Once it identifies that this, and I'll deliberately use a vague term, this thing, not an event, not an alert, because that carries something.
It's the same word, right? With different.
Right. Yeah. So, the 3 million alerts coming out of that one server really is maybe 2 events, right? So that really reduced that. Then it adds on top of that, the context of, hey, we're heading towards Christmas. Do you know what that means? The automation in there can then not even take it all the way to remediation, but it can automate the escalation of it, because it'll look at the context and say, hey, this is bad time, let's escalate it. Or it's not bad time, and like maybe that sits a little bit lower on the priority list. And then it routes it to like, hey, it's going to go to Alan, but this is a weekend and we have around the clock, around the sun, I'm going to automate the routing. And yes, some of these pieces exist in normal workflow routing, but when you pull it all together, that's when you need some of that intelligence to say, okay, in the full string of events, what do I need to do? I can automate this all the way to it. And when I finally present it to Sally in APAC, not Alan in North America, Sally's not as familiar with this system. So I'm going to present her with, here's what's happened in the past. Here's what we've done in the past. Here's what's been successful in the past. Here's what we suggest you execute from the playbook, the run books and everything. That will, if nothing else, it will bring her to 98% ready to go. And yep, we need to reboot this, or we need to run these scripts or whatever. Not like, I've never seen this before. I wish Alan was here.
Yeah, right. Well, and it's one of the things I think I learned, again, not being an expert in any of this, but is that, so with IT automation, you may be manually setting your thresholds, and it does what it's told.
Yep.
Right. And only what it's told. Yeah. And it's just a bunch of if-then, right, setups.
Yeah.
But with AI, it has the ability to learn from its own data set, or it has the ability of unsupervised learning. It will learn what's normal on the network. Yeah. Right. And that's also a big difference between just simple automation.
Absolutely.
Right? Okay.
Yeah, and that's one of the things. Yeah, that's one of the things that I push on a lot of the vendors about. Yeah, we know the static thresholds. That's all well and good.
Right.
But let's be honest, if life was that easy, we wouldn't have most of the outages that we have. Yep. So what we want to do is say, can you handle the dynamic thresholds? Because things do sway left and right and up and down just as a natural course of events. Yep. So what you maybe set now is not a particular threshold, but hey, as it's approaching 80% of our normal thresholds that aren't on a natural grade up or down that we've seen before, I want you to give me an early warning on something's not off the rails, because I don't know what that threshold is, but I know that if we have, say, for example, again, something that we wouldn't set normally, or deliberately, if we are seeing a rise in customer activity and we are seeing a rise in this and we're seeing a rise in that, that makes sense. So scale up, add another container, do what you need to do. Great.
Yeah, so we see a rise in customer activity, we're seeing website response time slow to 300 milliseconds, and so we're going to scale, we're going to load balance and kick
exactly.
Back. Yeah, okay.
But if you see something that's odd, where you see the rise in customer activity, but you're not seeing these other 2-3 things that you normally see, so this is really more anomalous behavior. Don't just scale up, because that might be actually worse, and it might be more security related, or it might be just something going off the rails.
Right? Denial of service attack, right?
Yeah. So maybe in that case, you automate the escalation to your SOC, not to your NOC as an outage.
Yeah.
But maybe you automate it elsewhere. again, and there are so many different scenarios that we would never, as humans, be able to come up with. That what we want to say is when it's anomalous in context, Sally is doing something from a different location at a different time, but her credentials are authorized to do that. It's like, wait, hold it. That's maybe not a good thing. And then you find out, like, hey, Sally's on vacation. She needed to access something. That's okay. But if it wasn't and you let it run, now what happens?
Right.
You find out too late. So there's all those things, like you said, where the dynamics of it, that we could never predict all those dynamic settings. So you set more guardrails rather than specific thresholds for, if you see things that are kind of going out of the ordinary, and it is the critical time for our systems, and it is our critical systems, definitely bring it to my attention sooner rather than waiting for it to collapse and then throw an alert. That's not going to help me.
Well, let's talk about, there's 4 types of AIOps that you identified here.
Yep.
Do you want to dive into those a little bit?
Sure.
High level. So we'll start again, tech-centric, process-centric, operations-centric, and then AIOps light. So let's start with tech-centric.
So basically how it came about was, in some of the early research, I found that organizations were approaching AIOps in different perspectives. They all ultimately still wanted the same end result. What's my business insights? When I do something on the technology side, what does it ultimately impact? How should I prioritize it? Should I make more investments on this versus that? All based on who cares on the business side. If they don't care and I can't make a business case for it, then why am I doing it?
Right.
So,
yeah, exactly.
So their approach to it is coming from different directions, whether it's the service delivery managers, whether it's the VP of infrastructure, so on and so forth. So they're all coming at it from different perspectives, and they have different drivers. So your technology-centric folks, your VP of infrastructure, maybe your engineering directors and stuff, they're looking at we need to improve our operational capabilities around the engineering, architecture, infrastructure. Part of that is simplifying our world. So let's get rid of the 17 monitoring tools and maybe bring it down to 4. When we route things around, well, I need to have it automatically go to Alan versus Sally, who's on the West Coast versus the East Coast. And again, all of these pieces exist in their own right, but are they stitched together well? So the technology-centric approach wants to ultimately provide better insights as to what's going on in our technology and how it could relate to the business side, and simplify our environment, our work procedures, all that stuff to do that. The process centric is coming from the opposite direction and saying, hey, we already are working closer to the business folks. We already organize and prioritize our activities around tickets and whatnot based on what we understand about the criticality of business. As far as the bottom end stuff, yeah, we need all that monitoring data, but you know what? That's not my domain. That's not where my checkbook kind of writes tickets. So yeah, it would be great if they simplified that environment, but frankly, I just want that data to get to me so I can make my business decisions and my workload decisions based on business from there. But that's someone else's domain to kind of really worry about. So I'm not going to worry too much about that. Plus, I don't have the technology expertise in my space on the service delivery side, on the top tier 1, tier 2 piece. The engineers, yeah, they love that stuff, but I don't, that's not who my resources are. They can't really process that data heavy stuff there. It's a little bit more abstracted and in the light of what the business is or what the technology services are, but definitely more towards that services side. So that's that process one. And we have vendors coming at it from both of those perspectives. Your ITOM, ITSM vendors saying, hey, we do AIOps as well. And, so they're, and I couldn't, there was no way I was going to be able to do the comparisons of those two platform vendors and do it justice. I'd either have to water it down or it end up falling, on one or the other. That's the north-south side. The east-west, easy to say.
Yeah, right.
So the operationally aligned is a slightly different scenario where big organizations, big financial services, global organizations, they're like, hey, we've already got, 50 million invested in Acme software portfolio.
Right.
So frankly, we've got all the pieces. I'm not going to go buy another platform. So Alan, you're charged with going through Acme Software's portfolio, stringing it all together, because we already have 7 of them and we only need 2 more, stringing it all together and give me a AIOps solution. That's your charge, Alan. And yeah, it'll all mostly come from, Acme software, but Acme software doesn't have a, double click exe, here's our AIOps solution. There's not one common user interface. We're not looking at doing reorgs because Joe's got his engineering team and Rajit has got their
you're
architecture
invested.
team.
You got all this technical data associated with it, right? So you can't rip and replace. It's
exactly. So that's the operationally aligned approach, where like, hey, we've got these things, they're all working. We're going to task someone with stitching it together internally. Okay. The light side is similar to that, but hey, we don't have those kind of budgets. We don't have, 50 million already in Acme software. We're a fairly heavy technology centric organization. So we have data scientists, we have a lot of engineers. We can build that glue that takes together the 4 tools that we have, add some of our own custom stuff. But Alan, I need that special engine that you have, that AI engine, and we'll leverage that because we have data scientists. So we're going to piece that together, where we're going to go get we're maybe a service provider, small targeted service provider. We have some very specialty network issues. So we have to use this specialty network monitoring and administrative tools and stuff, satellite, that sort of stuff. So you know what? Yeah, all that other stuff is great, but you know what? Our core focus is this, and our AIOps initiative is really only going to be targeting this aspect of our organization, or that's all our organization is. And therefore, yeah, we just need 4 pieces to plug it all together. We have all the data, we need an AI engine, or we need this specific thing. So that's where light is. That's the only way I could come up with a term for that wasn't like piecemeal. That doesn't sound as good.
Right.
Light sounds better.
You're a specialty provider of a specialty service to a niche market, and you're going to have, you're going to be engineered and architected to deliver those products and only those products versus, a retailer or a grocer who just services everybody with everything, and you got to have every layer of customer service and inventory management and supply chain, all those, the giant ERP systems. Okay. All right. Interesting. Okay. How many people are doing this? Is one of my questions. I was kind of curious about it.
Everybody is saying, well, everybody wants to do it. Let's start there.
Okay.
So
this is a thing. This is definitely a thing.
It is a thing.
Okay.
It is a thing. It's not going away. How it manifests itself, how it really, ends up settling in, time will tell. I do envision, sort of these different perspectives to converge. You would expect, because obviously, especially the bigger vendors, they're not going to allow one of the other ones coming from another angle to take their space. So I do envision that, and I look forward to that from the client perspective, to not have to make that decision, because right now, depending on how they approach, it's like, okay, really, I have to look at a subset of the vendors, but that one's better, and so I think it's confusing, but hopefully that kind of converges and settles in a little bit. But yes, it's a real thing. It's about as hot as it gets. Still a lot of confusion around it. We kind of touched on earlier, and when I picked this up about a little over a year ago for my coverage area, there was no real comprehensive definition out there. The term had been thrown out there, had been out there for 3-4 years. There wasn't much research on it. There wasn't anyone that had kind of really laid out, here's all the moving parts. So that was kind of my first task last year was, hey, at minimum, can we just start with, here's the 18 moving parts inside of AIOps.
So this is the purpose of your report then?
Yeah, absolutely. We can't have an informed discussion if we aren't sure we're starting at the same point. Right. I put a lot of stuff in there that, some of the vendors had issue with, and clients are asking about, we spoke earlier in the conversation about the contextual and experiential. I mean, that is ultimately so important to, why do you want to make that decision to increase your footprint technologically? Why do you want to scramble your tech support for this when it's not important? All those what ifs and whys, that's the layer of intelligence and the value layer that sits on top of what we've been, working through technology for decades. Is, hey, we can keep servers up, we can keep networks up, we can keep databases up. At the end of the year, we reward all three of those teams. They all made bonus, right? Because they all hit their their 5 nines, and the business owner is livid because their systems were all down at different times, of course.
Right. And
when it went to get resolved, they pointed fingers for the first 3 hours, and we're going to reward them because they hit their 5 nines.
Right.
And we do this, so that's why we have to get out of that space and say, I don't care whose fault it is. The issue is our business is not producing. They're not selling. That's bad for everyone, because business can't run without IT, and IT doesn't have a job if business is failing.
Right.
So.
But AIOps is not going to be a panacea because they don't exist.
Oh, God, no.
Right.
No, God, no.
But this is the next step beyond IT automation, is that, and that could help solve some of those issues more readily. So this goes back to the mean time to repair discussion at the top, right? Where, okay, so in this, what we're talking about here, that is indeed the end goal of a lot of AIOps is going to be to shorten mean time to repair, so the businesses are up and running faster, business continuity, disaster recovery.
And
maybe not. Maybe no. Let's lean back away from that. BC and DR are different, right?
Well, I was just going to go there.
This isn't a tornado hitting a data center. This is just an app going down at an inconvenient time, right?
But and if you talk with Brent about this, right, it's really about resilience. So the mean time to repair, it's great to reduce it, but wouldn't it be great to prevent it?
Oh, even
so
better.
If I see this pattern, that we know that this always goes out when these things are happening, and ultimately that's where it's going to land. We're like, hey, why don't we trigger that? We talked about dynamic thresholds. Why doesn't that trigger? Like, I've seen this happen before. I see the pattern of events coming. Let me get to Alan now and say, Alan, you got about 30 minutes to go and do X, Y, and Z, because here's what's going to happen. And I say that only because I've seen it happen 75 times out of 75 times when this pattern has occurred.
Right.
And generally it's 30 minutes, but it's been getting shorter. So you might want to move on this even quicker. Okay. But that's around the resiliency. Sure, tornado, it is what it is. There's no heads up on that.
There's no finger pointing there. It's just the way.
Right. But the normal recovery backup stuff, we really want to be more in a resilience view and model than let's wait for it to collapse, because at that point we've already lost. Now we're just mitigating loss.
What is it expensive? It sounds to me like it could be very expensive.
Yeah, and that is key, because there is a holistic aspect to this, right? If you want to just keep operating in very discrete silos, we know where those budgets are. And that's carved up here, there, and everywhere. And what we're saying is, in order to do this, you really need to kind of come together, and it can work. And I've seen it work in a couple of different ways. If everyone's there at the table first, then great. And from a process-centric perspective, it's going to be a little bit more important to have that. Everybody's kind of, yes, this is what we're trying to improve, and we're going to target these business systems and that sort of thing, these business services and all that good stuff. On the technology-centric approach, more because it's a little bit driven a little bit more by sort of a self-serving benefit. I know I need to reduce from 17 modules down to 12.
Right.
I know that'll give me $500,000 back on that. So guess what? I can offset my costs. I know if I improve those simple tasks, those 1-2 step tasks of rebooting a server, or the flipping, the router is is flapping, or this sort of thing, I can probably reduce my resources headcount costs by 15-20%. So I control that whole checkbook, so I don't need as much. And this is why, the other reason why I wanted to break out the report this way, to say, what is your driver? If my driver is reorging, cleaning up our infrastructure efforts, engineering, architecture, and whatnot, you can self-fund most of that and develop your ROI and return on value from there as well, without the blessing of business. As much as if you're coming from the service delivery side, you're not going to have those big budgets to put something in place like that. You're going to require the engineering folks to be involved, your business folks to be involved, to, kind of pull that together. Yeah, there's some interesting case studies that have come out. I mean, a major MSP is saving a ton of money, like in the millions, tens of millions of dollars range, because, and you know what they've done? They've just targeted those 5-10 use cases.
Right.
We know that this happens all the time. We know that's the execution. We know this happens all the time. That's the execution. And we're talking hundreds of thousands of tickets that they fully automated.
Mm-hmm.
And because of their volume, obviously, versus,
sure.
And we're talking tens of millions of dollars,
right.
Per client of theirs. Obviously, it's probably just a couple of million, but I'll take it.
Sure.
That'll easily pay for that platform.
Yeah, and that definitely pays. Well, I don't want to make assumptions, but you said it wasn't millions, so we'll run with that. I know you don't want to. You can't put just a hard dollar cost. It's not like buying a car. So if people want to dig into this topic more, they should get your report. That's number one, right? Mm-hmm. Because I think trying to get into my question was, what do IT and the business need to do to get their AI ops going in their organizations? I think that's a pretty long list of things that you really got to, right? I don't think that's a short list.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I guess the first thing they have to accept the fact that they don't know what's going on, everything that's going on in their house right now.
Right.
The old story of, get your house in order, right? I guess we could also tie in the, who moved my cheese, into that whole book thing, right?
I don't know that one, but sure. I get the idea.
Yeah, that was a book like way back. They were handing it out all to managers and stuff, basically as things were changing, it's like, who moved my cheese?
Okay.
So the first thing that they have to do is just accept the fact that they don't truly know what's going on in their house. Right. And just gain even the raw insights into what it is, what it isn't, where the potential problem areas are. And then you can tackle it with our normal practices. Okay, let's drill onto this one. Let's drill into that. Right now, most are just kind of flying blind to some extent because, like we said, if you're not really looking at your cloud costs and your transactions and your ingest, and you're not looking at it in depth, you really don't know where that money is going. It's going to Azure, it's going to AWS, but when you do, if you're doing internal chargebacks, right, cost chargebacks, are you still blending all those because you really can't break it down? Well, there's some insights that this can provide you. And say, oh, wow, again, like I was saying, these systems that are not highly critical to us are costing us almost as much as the others. Maybe we can change the prioritization on the cloud and the ingest and whatever. But again, we need to get that there. So what do they start with is really just getting their arms around what's truly going on in our environment.
And that in the part of AIOps that does that, it must be a discovery, right? And then it has a discovery function, obviously.
Yes.
And then, this is over a period of time. It isn't just points in time like a C and B would be, or IT asset management, right? And so this is over a period of time. So you get to kind of get a network. I'm thinking about these flow charts that have the different weighted arrows to see where things are going, right? Where's the IP traffic going, and where, right, and that type of thing, right? And then that gives you what? It gives you this 10,000 foot view of your organization from an IT perspective, right?
Yep. Okay. Yeah, exactly. It's like our IT is spending 37% with Azure. It's like, okay, now let's look at it within Azure. 73% is for these microservices and 20% is for that. And it's like, okay, 73%, that sounds awfully high. Now and these are in these tools, they are like sort of, they are point and click, drill down, like you can, in seconds, you can literally click through that to see where's my breakdown.
Okay.
Because it's tracking at those transactional levels.
Right.
And what you would have needed beforehand was the engineer, hey, Bob the engineer, can you run me a report on all the transactions that are coming out of here?
You got a spreadsheet with all this on there I could look at for 16 years and not makes heads or tails of it, right?
Exactly. And could you correlate it? It's like, I don't know what those transactions are.
Right.
But the AIOps tool actually strings, so the transaction monitoring, right? Distributed transaction monitoring actually links from that website cart This transaction came through here, through here, through here, over there, over there, over here, over there, so on and so forth. So you can basically then filter out, I just want what's associated with this transaction. And it removes all the noise, all the other noise. And now you can say, why was it going through that hop? Wait, that doesn't make sense. No wonder it's costing us more, because that's going through a Splunk log management thing where we don't need that detail in Splunk log. No wonder our Splunk costs are 20% higher this week. So yes, those tools will string that whole transaction together from a user clicking all the way down to the mainframe transaction on the back end.
Right.
And again, good luck doing that on a spreadsheet. Right.
Okay.
But it does that. And for the most part, they all do that to mixed extents of quality, but they all do it and just highlight it. And those graphs, I can never remember the names, the ones that they show kind of like interwoven thing. And as soon as you highlight one, the others kind of fade out. And it'll show you, it'll show the, sort of the pathway through.
I don't know what it's called either, but I can visualize it pretty easily.
Yeah, which is great, because you're like, oh, that's what it is. And if you know where you want to start, you can say, okay, just filter everything on this.
Yep.
And so like one of the demos that I did for, or the challenges that I did for the last wave, I asked them explicitly that. I says, you need to demonstrate for me, the tech people believe they're having a problem with Android devices. And we've experienced this. So I need you to filter out Android users using Android device that are going through the Texas data center, that are hitting this, and so on and so forth. And that chain of events. So now you can narrow down, like, I don't care if it's going through Singapore, I don't care about this. And I can truly see where my bottleneck was or where my problem may have occurred. And that's, again,
in context. Again, this is in context.
Yeah.
Back to the top of the discussion, right?
Yeah. And the follow-on to that was session replay. So I said, okay, now let's look at what the user was doing at that point. And they are literally capturing like the clicks and mouse movements there. So you can see that they were just getting really annoyed because something was delayed. And then they would, the old click rage, which then sent 75 more, actions, which you already bottlenecked, right? And that created, and that's how you spiral out of control. And then we say, okay, what's the remediation? As soon as we see that pattern, spin up another container or spin up another this, it alleviates the container and everything clears.
And that's what I had him do. The predictive mode, right?
Exactly. Yep. And that's what I had him do, is walk through, like, when you detect that one transaction is causing negative impact on the other two, move one of them or spin up, do something right, so that the other two aren't getting crushed because of one bad actor. And then when it's done, bring it back. And this happens maybe in 3 seconds,
right? Or
15 seconds or 2 milliseconds, and that happens that quickly. Plus, now you're not paying for the over architecture that we used to do, which was, let's just throw 3 more servers at it.
Right.
It's a cloud. So spin it up, spin it down. It costs you 5 cents. No big deal. And the user is not impacted. Ultimately, it goes back to the user is no longer impacted. They don't end up going to Wayfair instead of Amazon because they got really ticked off with the rage clicking. So subtle nuances and stuff, but there's so many different scenarios like that when you have all the data there and these engines can process it at scale,
right,
you can provide these insights.
Right. And then if you want, I'm assuming, turn the AI loose to start making some decisions along this, right?
Absolutely.
To the level of trust that you're comfortable with.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, think about it. It's not, most engineers are not going to have a hard time where if you see this scenario, spin up a new container.
Yeah, load balance it. It's
load balance it essentially on the fly and bring it back.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. We can do that. A million times a day. Who cares? Right. No risk.
But with the AI, it's adding another layer of I guess I'll call it intelligence, right?
Yeah.
To that process, because it's not just based on fixed thresholds, for example.
No.
Right?
Oh yeah, that's just like, I see something I don't like and it's out of the ordinary. It's an anomalous behavior. Let me do this. It would be as if you had enough people to watch every data point and every connection.
There you go.
And you're like, oh, let's move this over. It's ready. Let's move it back.
Okay.
That's all it's really doing, and that's where I joke about, is that really artificial intelligence? Is it, the detection is where it gets gray, right? Like you said, it's seeing something that it hasn't seen before. You didn't have to specify when you see this, this. All you specify is when you see something you haven't seen, then do these actions. Right. And that action might be simply alert somebody. If you're truly not, or if you're in a secure environment, you may not want to, whatever it is,
Sure.
But it's, you can detect on the opposite rather than the specific.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So I think that, why don't we just leave it there, I guess, kind of coming up on the hour. So thank you, Carlos. I appreciate your time. Okay.
Thank you. You're good.
If you liked this episode, please tell your friends and check out our other shows. You can find Inside DT on all the major hosting platforms, including Apple, Amazon, Spotify, and Google. Talk to you soon.